I feel like if we had $1 for every time someone commented on one of our posts about how inhumane or barbaric e-collars and prong collars are, we could probably be retired by now.
Right. We usually always get those comments and stuff from people that really don't understand the tool. The people that come in here and make those comments, their dog's completely out of control. They have the dog on a harness. It's bouncing off the front counter. It's pulling them around. And a lot of them aren't even open to understanding how to properly use a tool. They just get upset, and yet their dogs are completely out of control.
Right. Yeah. I know your favorite's always when people come in on a harness, the comments that you always give me about that. They're my favorite, I think.
Well, yeah, they come in on a harness and they get dragged around everywhere. And then when we get into the training bay, they try to, as they're walking the dog, tell me the dog doesn't pull them that bad, or the dog kind of is excited. That's why it's pulling so much, when it's really dragging them around and they can hardly hold on to the dog the entire time.
We'd like to welcome everyone back to episode 3 of Elite K-9 Unleashed, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. E-collars, prong collars, and all the training tools. So let's jump into it. I feel like this is a real controversial topic. Like we said a few minutes ago, we get tons of comments on social media when we post about it. It always seems to be a really hot topic for people. They're either extremely pro prong collars, e-collars, first savers, and training tools, or they are very much on the other side of that spectrum. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just think nothing in life is one-sided, and you get all these people that really just want to talk about positive. And I'm not saying we do a ton of our training with positive reinforcement, using food and treats and toys and all that kind of stuff. But there's a need for tools. There's a need to be able to correct your dog. I always try to tell people, nothing is one-sided. Nothing in life is. So yes, we have good, but then on the other side, we have to be able to use some corrections here and there. A lot of people that aren't open-minded to this kind of stuff or don't even want to consider it usually are the ones that have dogs that are completely out of control.
Right.
And they're not open to talk about it. They're not open to even look at something else. When we sit here and say, we're all for all positive, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being positive.
And for some dogs, that does work.
And I'm not saying there are some dogs out there that you can get away with doing just all positive, but that's not most dogs, right? I tell people it's kind of like raising kids. If you are always all positive, right, your kid makes a poor decision, and instead of correcting them or telling them, hey, you can't do that, or them getting in trouble, you just reward them or just kind of move past the issue and try to get another treat out or try to use something to reward them or get them to listen. That just doesn't work. That's not real life.
Right.
So being able to correct the dog at the right time with the right tool really is what dog training is all about. Anybody can wave a treat in front of a dog's face again and again and again and again. But at the end of the day, those dogs are usually the ones that can't work with distractions, because like you go out and work with distractions or dogs or reactivity or any of those kind of things, and the dog could care less. The dog is hyper-focused. The dog doesn't want to listen. And you can sit there, you could have a steak waving it in the dog's face. Dog could care less. So trying to just tell people, and we're not here to convince people to use tools. I do think tools are used in the wrong way.
Absolutely.
I think without a doubt, people think the tools are just going to fix the problem, and when in fact they make it worse because people don't understand what they're doing. So my advice would be open-minded to what works, right? There's tons of dogs in shelters. There's tons of dogs that get put down every year because they're not trained. And they get out of control, just like a lot of the dogs that we have come in here are completely out of control. And people, instead of actually taking the time to learn and to properly use tools, they would rather just not do anything with the dog, let the dog do whatever it wants, and eventually the dog's out of control, we can't handle the dog, and they take it to the shelter.
Yeah.
So, yes, you do need to use the tools correctly, go find a professional trainer that knows how to use the tools and learn about them. And if you've learned about them, you've seen them used, you've done all that, and you still don't want to use them, well, that's completely up to you. But don't just say, I'm not going to do that when you don't have any idea about them and you don't have a dog that does anything you ask it to do.
Well, yeah, and I think it does also depend on like the dog that you're working with, the behavior that you're dealing with. I mean, you have some dogs who come in and they really just need very basic pet obedience, and you're not really ever going to work into some of those upper tools that you need to help correct the behaviors that they're dealing with, because they're very simple and straightforward things that don't need as much work as a big behavioral modification does. And a lot of those dogs that, I mean, we've seen it time and time again, people who bring dogs in, that these dogs are like on the verge of being put down for behavioral euthanasia. At the end of the day, a lot of them have only had experience with positive reinforcement trainers, and had they went down a route where maybe some of those other options were explored, they may not be in the position that they're in.
Yeah, we get it all the time that we're their third or fourth trainer, and it's been all positive, and it doesn't work.
Yeah. And I think, too, sometimes it's just exposure to it be the right way, right? I mean, we have a trainer on staff right now that had been through a training that was all positive, and wasn't really sure how she felt about the use of first savers, prong collars, and e-collars. And once she started working with you and saw the proper way to do that, has a completely different opinion on their use in training and getting results and transformations that dogs and pet parents are needing.
I think a lot of people that really dislike tools really have never been taught or understand them. They just see people that probably aren't using them correctly in the first place, right? You see it all the time with e-collars. Well, I get people that come in here all the time. The dog has no obedience, and they say, well, yeah, I mean, I use an e-collar. It's like, what could you be using an e-collar for? And, well, I used it, but it didn't work.
Right.
Yeah, because the dog doesn't understand anything. You haven't taught the dog anything, and now you're trying to just use an e-collar to fix problems. All it does is make the problems worse. And then they wonder why it doesn't work. So a lot of people that have seen these tools have seen people use them that don't have any business using them, compared to understanding them, understanding how to use them. And a lot of the tools, especially e-collars, prong collars and stuff like that, we can start in basic training, but we teach the dog how to shut pressure off. We teach foundational stuff so the dog understands how to give to pressure. We just don't put the collar on and just start correcting, the crap out of the dog. That's not how you do it. So I think a lot of these people just have seen really bad things with some of these tools. And again, anything can be used incorrectly. A vehicle, I mean, we see crashes all the time. You see horrible things that happen with vehicles. It's just a tool, right? If you use it incorrectly, it's going to cause problems. If you use it correctly, you could drive your entire life and not have an issue.
Right. Yeah. Everything can be used for good or for bad. There's good and bad sides to all things. So do you think people just assume prong collars and e-collars are cruel just because of their perceptions? Like just how they've been introduced to that, or things they've seen, or their personal experience with them, or they just they're forming opinions without ever using those tools?
Yeah, I think most of them have never even used the tool. It just looks mean. When you talk about stimulation with an e-collar, you see a prong collar that's got prongs on it, and people just think, oh my gosh, that's so mean. You shouldn't use that on a dog. I try to remind people these are animals. Yes, we love our animals, we love our dogs, but they're physical animals. If they have a problem with each other, they correct each other.
Right.
Physically correct each other. Yes, there's body language and other stuff that goes into it, but ultimately, eventually, if they have a problem, they physically correct each other. So to say that you can't physically correct a dog, we treat dogs like they're people, and oh my goodness, we can't, or babies, like we can't put any pressure. We don't want any discipline. Well, that's not how life works. Like, they're physical animals. They correct each other, and a correction is natural to a dog. Whether they're in the pack setting, they're going to get corrected, physically corrected. So it's no different when we're giving them a correction. What we're after is making sure they understand, teaching them first, and then using corrections if needed. If you're using these tools correctly, if you're having to correct your dog again and again and again and again, then you're not using corrections properly. It should be. I mean, look at Phoenix. Look at Tango. Look, like if you correct a dog correctly, its corrections are few and far between. Once you get to the point where the dog understands what you want, if you correct properly, you get to the point where you don't have to correct the dog almost at all, ever.
Yeah, I do think you're right about that. I feel like as I watched you train with Tango and watch Savannah with Phoenix, or you guys working with Raptor, I mean, I don't feel like I see you guys give them corrections with the e-collar hardly ever. Very, very rarely. I think I can count very few times that I've seen that happen. So I do think you have a point.
It's almost never.
Yeah, it is
If
never.
you do it correctly. And this isn't all dogs. I mean, there are some dogs out there that take any opportunity they can to go do what they want to do. And there are those dogs that may need more corrections than others, but those are usually pretty few and far between. There are some dogs that will take any opportunity they can, though. But for the most part, you train a dog correctly, you correct the dog when it needs corrected, and it happens very rarely.
Do you remember your first experience, like getting exposed to those tools? And did you have any aha moments the first time you were able to work with an e-collar?
I mean, just in general, when I went to K-9 school, I mean, we'd had, hounds. We had all the hounds. We'd use e-collars for them. A lot of tracking collars, that kind of stuff. So I understood some foundation to it, but not in the aspect that I use it now. When I started really understanding and going to actual classes on them, it made a lot more sense. There are several different ways that people use e-collars. There's not just one way, but how we do it now, after seeing some of the different ways and using some of the different ways, by far, I think, is probably the best way to use them.
Can you tell us how a prong collar works and why it looks worse than it actually is when providing a correction with a prong collar on a dog?
Yeah, when we get into prong collars, everybody thinks they look scary because they have points on them. The points are like rounded. They're not meant to, it's not like they're sharpened or anything like that.
Right.
I mean, they are contact points, and are they uncomfortable? Yes, that's the whole point of it. But they distribute pressure way better than any other tool. A lot of people want to put their dog on a slip leash. Slip leashes, and I'm not saying we use slip leashes sometimes. There's dogs that don't need a lot of pressure at all. But slip leash pressure is very one-sided. It can be hard on the neck, the throat. So, I mean, there are reasons you use a slip leash or a dominant dog collar or something like that, usually with reactive dogs, that kind of stuff. A lot of times we won't put a prong on that dog or use an e-collar until we've worked through the issue. But the prong collars are really good about distributing pressure around the neck. They pull from both sides. They've got distribution plates. And most of the time, the amount of actual physical pressure you put on the dog is very, very minimal compared to like a slip leash. I mean, you're putting a ton of pressure on the dog's neck. So those prong collars are designed so that you don't have to put a ton of pressure on the dog's neck. It is very, very light pressure for a high corrective pressure to the dog. Much, much better for the dog's neck, throat, all of that.
So in some ways, the prong collar is more fair to dogs than a slip leash is?
Well, if you're looking at the health side of things, absolutely. Slip leashes are, I mean, it's one thing if you had a dog that didn't pull on the end of a slip leash ever, well then yeah, slip leash is fine. But the dogs that sit and drag you, I mean, you can hear it crushing the throat. You can hear them, and it's not one time, right? It's every time they walk the dog is pulling as hard as it can with the pressure against the dog's neck. That repeated pressure is not good for a dog.
Right.
So being able to allow, like with a prong collar, do corrections properly, and you have a dog that doesn't pull at all, and when the dog does get pressure, it's very, very, very physically soft pressure, fingertip pressure even sometimes. Yeah, sometimes you got to correct a dog harder, but usually with how it distributes the pressure, it does not take a whole lot of pressure to correct a dog.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we see a lot in here with slip leashes is like incorrect placement of them. They're not high enough in the neck behind the ears. They really have that like right around the throat area.
Yep.
And so I do think what you're saying about it, the way it distributes pressure and you're able to make sure it stays in the correct placement, I think is really a lot more fair to dogs in general.
Yeah, the prong stays a lot better. Slip leash starts to move. Not only that, everybody, comes in and, well, I have my dog on a harness because, he chokes himself or he pulls on the slip leash so instead of just fixing the pulling, then we put him in a harness that is designed for pulling. It distributes the pressure around the dog so that he can pull. And now you have a dog that pulls five times harder because we don't want to put any pressure on the dog's neck.
Right. Yeah. What do you think the biggest mistake that you see people make when using prong collars is?
Well, we see it all the time, right? People come in here, we work the dog a little bit, teach the dog how to shut pressure off or how to give to pressure, and then start to work a heel or any other obedience as we work through with a prong collar. And they think it's the tool, right? It's the prong collar. You will see dogs dragging people on a prong collar
all the time
because they don't understand how to use it. They don't understand the timing, when to apply a correction. So I think the most frustrating thing is people come in here, you show them what can happen if you know what you're doing, and they think it's the tool itself, right? Well, can I just get a prong collar? And I tell them that's not going to fix your issue. Sure, you can whether you buy it from us or you buy it somewhere else, they can get a prong collar. Usually those people within a week or two call back and book training because they're like, well, it's not working.
Right.
I know I told you it wasn't going to work because you have to understand how to use the tool. You have to understand how it works and all sorts of other stuff that goes into it. The prong collar itself doesn't fix anything.
Yeah, it's how you use it and the training
Correct.
and foundations behind it. When people are looking to possibly purchase a prong collar to add to their training tool belt, are there things you tell them to look for in a really high quality prong collar versus a cheap prong collar?
Yeah, so the only collars we get, period, are Hermspringer. You see all these knockoffs come in, they're different brands, and they are just low quality. Half of them are set up like they shouldn't be set up. So we try to tell people, if you buy nice gear, if you spend the money and buy it, you usually only have to buy it once. So that's all we carry. Even our fur savers, our prong collars are all Hermspringer. So that's what we recommend. There are some other companies out there that make decent prong collars too. We just choose to use Hermspringer. But there are a lot of companies out there that do not make a quality collar, and you kind of get what you pay for.
Right.
Spend the money up front, get something nice, and it's going to last you for the next 10 or 15 years, no issues.
I mean, and they really do. Tango's lasted him both his fur saver and his prong. He had from the day you came home until the day he passed away. So investing in quality equipment, even though it's an investment up front, really can save you over the course of your dog's life because you're not constantly repurchasing the same tools over and over again.
Yeah, you get people that buy an e-collar and it lasts, 3 months or 6 months, and then they've got to buy another one. And it's a cheap one that's $60-$70. And by the time they bought 5 or 6 or 7, because the controller quits working, batteries won't charge, it doesn't work. They could buy, a mini educator, a dog trail, a garment, a quality collar, e-collar, and buy one and have it last for 10 or 15 years.
Right.
So spend the money, buy something nice, and it will last you. You definitely get what you pay for when it comes to a lot of your gear.
Yeah, that's true for a lot of things in life, but especially when it comes to dog training.
Yep.
So if we're breaking down these tools, can you explain to people, especially maybe if they've never had experience with them or have used them in their dog training, what the difference between a prong collar and an e-collar is and when each should be used in training and the appropriate use of them?
So a prong collar or a fur saver. Fur savers are just bigger links for, like if we're talking choke chains, a lot of people call them choke chains. There's all sorts of different, there's really small tight chain ones. There's ones that have a little bigger loops. So the fur savers are kind of the bigger linked ones. They do a really good job of not eating up the hair on the dog's neck, whereas like a really tight chained one can eat up the hair around the dog's neck. Your prong collars and your e-collars. So prong collars is another tool, or first saver and prong collars are tools that we're going to use connected to a leash. So that's going to go around the dog's neck. We're going to be able to use leash pressure to correct the dog, or even guide the dog, but really correct the dog with pressure. A e-collar is something that and I shouldn't say you never put an e-collar on a dog without the foundation done. There are some times, like if you're doing, a lot of times you'll hear like rattlesnake training, or you really want to give your dog like an environmental correction, which is kind of what rattlesnake training is. If you just put that collar, like an e-collar on your dog, that's essentially how they do rattlesnake training is They have a snake, they put an e-collar on the dog walks up to the snake, and you got to time this right, but the dog starts to pay attention to the snake. As soon as it starts getting close to the snake, really interested, they correct the dog, and the dog thinks that the snake is what caused that, or whatever else environmentally you're trying to do that with. So there are some times where you can put an e-collar on a dog with no training, but there's specific reasons for it. Aside from that, e-collar is something that we put on after we've done stuff with a first saver, with a prong collar, that allows us to be able to control the dog off leash. However, when we first start with e-collar, we don't just go off leash, right? We still have built all the foundation, and then we do e-collar with leash pressure if needed. But the dog's on leash, and we work through that so that they understand how to shut pressure off with the e-collar. And if they don't understand low level pressure or how to shut the pressure off, we can assist with some leash pressure. And there's really two ways to do that. Some will use the e-collar with leash pressure, and some use the e-collar, try to get them to shut low level pressure off. If not, then they add leash pressure because they understand leash pressure, how to shut it off. Not only that, leash pressure is directional. So, right, if you wanted a dog to sit, you could lift upward or up back a little bit. Down, you can put downward pressure. If the dog's too far out, you can put pressure towards you. So leash pressure is directional, where e-collar pressure is not directional. So sometimes when you add pressure with an e-collar, you can help use directional pressure if they're confused by it or don't know what to do. So that first stage of transitioning to e-collar does not mean you just put the e-collar off and you're off leash, right?
Right.
You put the e-collar on and you still do a lot of foundational work on leash until eventually you get off leash, and then an e-collar goes on, and then that pretty much can become your leash. Your dog's off leash, can run around, and if the dog decides not to listen, you have control of the dog.
Well, and I know we get a lot of comments about how detrimental e-collars are to dogs and their lives, but I know you are a big proponent of the fact that e-collars can give dogs more freedom in their life. So I was just wondering if you could share a few examples of ways that you feel like e-collars actually improve the lives of dogs who've been through e-collar training.
And so think about these animals that are, dogs are made to go and run, and they can cover, we've had hounds that can cover miles and miles and miles in a day chasing something. Animals or dogs are made to be able to go run and not be tethered to you 24/7. To me, that's a pretty sad life, to have to be hooked up all the time, right? Just think if you had to be hooked to somebody by a 6-foot leash all the time, everywhere one person goes, you have to go. You don't have a choice in what you want to do, what you can do. So yeah, the amount of freedom to allow a dog to be able to go run and play and have a good time, hike. We have people at horseback with their dogs. We have people that just want to be able to go play ball in a park, or out in a field, or just give the dog some exercise. A lot of people say, well, I walk my dog. Well, that's great, but your dog is actually meant to run. Like, they like to go run. They like to be able to burn some energy and have fun. Attached to a leash, I'm not saying that that's a horrible life, that the dog should never be on leash, but there's a time to put the dog on a leash, and there's a time to be able to let the dog go do what the dog wants. And Yes, there are long lines. Okay, so now your dog's on a 30-foot long, or a 50-foot or a 100-foot, but the dog's still on leash. So I think if you truly look at this like you should, e-collars are the fairest things you could do for your dog, period. It allows them to be able to go do and enjoy and not have to be tethered right next to you all the time. And yet then you have the control if you need to get the dog back and they don't listen, then you can use a correction if needed. But it gives you way more freedom. It gives the dog way more freedom. So in my mind, the fairest thing you could do is get a dog on e-collar that truly understands e-collar, understands all of it if you've done it right. That's the most freedom the dog will ever have.
Well, and I think at the end of the day, a lot of e-collar training is about communication. And so there is a safety aspect to that. Like you said, dogs that go hiking, if there's, a wild animal that's getting too close, or you're just out doing whatever at the park, out in your yard even, and they are too close to the road and there's maybe a car coming and you need to recall them, but they're a little too far to actually hear you, you're still able to communicate with them and get their attention and get them to come back to you. And so I think safety is a really big part of e-collar training too, in addition to giving them the most off-leash freedom that they really would ever have.
Yeah, it probably saves more lives than people talk about, but being able to, especially around here, we have, we're not far from Jackson, we're not far from Teton, we have beautiful country around here. We have elk and moose and deer and coyotes and bears, wolves. We have all sorts of stuff. Yeah, snakes.
All sorts of stuff.
So we have lots of people that go hiking or horseback riding, and that's a big concern, right? They'll come across a moose, a deer, something, and the dog wants to go chase it. And where they don't have control, who knows if you're ever going to see that dog again. If he chases a moose or something like that, chances of a moose killing a dog are probably pretty high. Or any other animal. So being able to have that control so you can recall your dog, because if not, you don't know what's going to happen. Same thing with vehicles. We see all the time. Well, we've had people come to evals that were thinking about training because their dog won't come back when they recall it, among a lot of other issues. But and then, within a couple weeks, their dog got out, got hit, and is now and died because it got hit.
Yep.
If they would have just invested the time into training, that dog would have been able to be recalled or would have listened when it got out. But so I think we focus too much on, we better never ever correct a dog, and we just let them run wild. But yet they end up in shelters. We can't control them. They end up hurt. They end up getting killed. Instead of just doing what you're supposed to do and train the dog and have the ability to recall the dog with some kind of tool or an e-collar when needed.
Right. So I know we've talked about slip leashes, first savers, prong collars, e-collars. Are there any other training tools or gear that you see people use that they maybe don't use correctly or are very misunderstood tools in the training world?
Harnesses.
Yeah.
I think harnesses have a place. We use harnesses and bite work all the time to back tie the dog. That way we're not putting pressure on the dog's neck if we're going to, do bite work with them. We track on harnesses. You can rappel with harnesses. You have dogs that pull sleds and that kind of stuff with harnesses. So harnesses they have a purpose. And a decent purpose, right? They're if you're using it for some of that stuff, that's absolutely what they were designed to do. But then we've gone clear to the other side that we don't use that tool for what it's actually used for. We just put a harness on every dog because we don't want to put any pressure on the dog. We don't want to put any corrections on the dog, so we just put it on a harness, and that's how we walk the dog, which is not what you're supposed to do with a harness. Harness is designed mainly for a job, or allowing the dog to pull, which is why when you put your dog on a harness, the dog pulls.
Yeah.
And then you see videos about no pull harnesses. That's literally defeats the purpose of what a harness is. There's no such thing as a no pull harness. Not at all. Yes, they make some that've got clips on the front of them, so it kind of turns the dog sideways. Doesn't stop the dog from pulling. Instead, actually use a tool that's designed to correct the dog once you understand how to use it. And then you get a dog that just doesn't pull.
Yeah. So harnesses do have their place, just not for your typical, like, hey, let's go out for a walk or
Correct.
in place of a leash
Yep, 100%.
and collar.
Yeah, harnesses have a place, but I would see that's probably the tool that we see misused all the time. Every dog that comes in here is on a harness.
Yes.
And is dragging people around to the point they can't even hold on to the dog.
Yeah.
Or are injured. We've had several come in that their arms have been messed up. The dogs have pulled them over, and it's because they're on a harness. The dog has no problem pulling them wherever they want to go.
Yeah, I would say 80% of people that we see come through the door that pulling is their main complaint. The dogs usually do come through the door on a harness.
Yep.
What do you think the most ridiculous argument you've heard against using prong collars and e-collars has been?
The most ridiculous argument?
Yeah, about to not use them.
Well, yeah, everybody says the biggest thing you hear is if you were a real dog trainer or if you knew how to train a dog, you wouldn't need any of those tools.
Yes.
And it's quite the opposite. Like real trainers don't know how to or trainers that aren't real trainers don't know how to use those tools. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of controversy in this in both worlds. But you can watch people that, and I'm not saying like there is a place for all positive. That's why we are open to a lot of, I shouldn't say all positive, but mostly positive, right? But it doesn't go both ways, right? They're very much usually all positive is the only way. And if you do anything else, you don't know how to train a dog. And usually what you'll find with those people, and we tell people all the time, like if you want all positive, we will refer you to somebody around here that's all positive. I'm not saying you can't do that or we're completely against it.
Yeah, we have a list of people locally that we'll refer to if they're not wanting balance training and they're only wanting positive reinforcement trainers that we refer out to.
Yeah. But most of those people end up back with us because, well, I went to this trainer, it didn't work. And it's like, yeah, I told you that wasn't going to work, but I think some people have to figure that out on their own. But yeah, I just think, and I'm not saying there are, like we talked about, there are some dogs that can be trained with all positive that are amazing. But they're few and far between. And most of the people that want to talk bad and tell people they don't know how to train dogs don't have a clue about training a dog. And if they have a dog, it's completely out of control. They don't take it anywhere. They can't do anything with it. I mean, they won't tell you that. They won't show you their dog that they can't even take out of the house because it's completely out of control. But they'll sit because heaven forbid we put any pressure on a dog. They should just do whatever they want. And again, is why we're in the crisis that we are with every shelter's full. Every place is full. Dogs are getting put down just because of space alone. Dogs are getting euthanized for behavioral issues, all of this stuff because heaven forbid.
Often behavioral issues that could be corrected. Yes.
That are yes. Most of them are way fixable. But instead of doing that, we're just going to say people that use tools don't know how to train, and we'll sit and euthanize dogs, not talk about that. But we can be all positive that way. We don't ever correct a dog.
Yeah, and I think it's just educating people to be open to seeing the correct way to use those tools and their place in the dog training world and their place in obedience and helping dogs who otherwise maybe would be euthanized because of a behavioral issue that really, at the end of the day, could simply be fixed.
Yeah. And yeah, I would tell everybody out there, if you can try to be open-minded. It is easy just to think one way and your way is right. I'm open to all sorts of ideas. We have people come in, we go to trainings all over, and we're going to 2 more trainings this month in California to learn more, right? There is not one thing that works. So we're open to ideas. We're open to new things. So I just tell the people that are completely closed-minded that you really need to educate yourself and take the time to learn about you. If you are really against something, maybe go take a class, go to a trainer and see how it works, see what your thoughts are. We have people come in here all the time. They're like, I'd never put a prong collar on my dog. And we work through things and they're like, well, maybe we can try it. I kind of want to see how it works. Their dog's happy as can be, taking treats or playing with toys, still happy as can be. We're rocking all their obedience, and the dog got hardly any pressure, some corrective pressure, but the dog's still happy as can be. Everything's fine. And they're like, I've been trying to do that for 3 years, and I couldn't get my dog to do that. You did it in 5 minutes.
Right.
Yeah, it's understanding how to use a tool. And I think people think that there have to be these huge corrections. And yeah, some dogs you have to give a decent correction to, but most dogs, a little bit of pressure goes a long ways. You correct at the right time. The dog stays happy. The dog works through it. And now you have a dog that you can go do things with and you can enjoy and you can take places and actually have a life.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there are ever circumstances where you would not recommend the use of a prong collar or an e-collar? Would there ever be a time when you would maybe advise against that if someone was dealing with something?
Yeah, anytime you're dealing with reactivity stuff, you want to be, and I'm not saying never, but you want to be really careful sometimes with prong collars, e-collars. A lot of times when a dog is reactive, if you correct with some of those tools, it makes it worse. It winds them up more. Sometimes you can get the dog to redirect on you. Most of the dogs that we're dealing with that have serious reactivity issues, if they have not redirected on the owners, they're close. Mm-hmm. Or we have several that come that have dogs that are already redirecting on them, redirecting on the family dogs. We have one that's redirecting on dogs, redirecting on their cat. So a lot of those tools, sometimes for that is not the tool to use. You're probably going to be using maybe a slip leash, you're going to be using a dominant dog collar, you're going to be using some of these collars that don't necessarily add a whole lot of pressure or pain, right? Corrections to a dog that's already actively reactive, because that can cause more issues. So yeah, in those circumstances, you want to be really, really careful. A lot of people will say, well, we couldn't figure it out, so we just put an e-collar on the dog, and he got in a fight, and we shocked the dog, and it made it worse. Yeah, it probably will. There's a whole bunch of foundational stuff and work that needs to be done to fix that problem long before we're using those tools, because those tools can cause issues with that stuff.
Well, and I would say probably one of the most extreme cases that we ever saw of that was when we were working with Oz, right? And they hadn't even got to e-collar training yet, but because of all the different types of collars that they'd used getting up to that point, his propensity to redirect on his owners was really, really bad and really severe. And you had to kind of scale back and do a little bit of dog psychology with Oz to be able to help him. And at the end of the day, he finally was able to integrate back in with his family and with the other dogs in the home. But you really kind of had to work that situation backwards because so much correctional things had been tried with Oz, especially when it came to different types of collars, that it did cause some severe reactivity with him.
Yeah, he was reactive to the point you couldn't even, if you were on a leash with him, he was
coming back up.
Yep, he was trying to redirect on you. So, but yeah, it can go both ways, right? Tools can be used in the wrong way and create a whole bunch more problems. And then you've got to work past that or work backwards through that to try to do some different things with the dog to get the dog stop doing what it's doing long before you use those kind of tools again.
Yeah, absolutely. So if someone were on the fence about wanting to possibly start using these tools in their training tool belt, what would you say to them?
Find a trainer that knows what they're doing, professional trainer. If you're curious about it, come ask about it. We've got plenty of dogs here that we can show you, work through stuff with all sorts of collars. Come see it, come see how it works, and if after you see it you still don't want to do it, then don't do it. But at least get educated. If you want to use the stuff, go to a trainer that knows what they're doing, so that you are taught the proper ways to use the tools, And most likely, you're going to be amazed by what you can do with training, not just the tool, to the point where you'll have an amazing dog if you spend the time needed and learn and understand the tools, what they can do for you. You can have an amazing dog.
Is there any other myths or beliefs out there regarding these tools that you wish people would stop believing that we haven't already covered?
Not necessarily. Just, everybody thinks they're harsh or they're abusive or if you use them, you don't know how to train a dog, and there's all sorts of stuff that goes into this. I just don't agree with a lot of the statements that are made. I think the biggest thing to me, dogs in general, people think they're like babies, right? And they're not a baby, they're an animal. Dogs kill people every year. Dogs can be dangerous. And not understanding how to train, not understanding how to use tools, not understanding that stuff can put people in danger. And you see it in the news all the time, dog attacks, but dogs kill people every year. So get the training, spend the time, and don't be afraid to use it. If a tool works, don't be afraid to use it. That's there so that we can use it. Not every tool is needed. Not every dog's going to need every tool, but be open-minded to using tools, understanding how they work, understanding training so that you can have a long, happy life with your dog. We try to tell people, we have so many people come in here that are like besides themselves, right? It's like they're having to lock dogs in different bedrooms and only let dogs out at certain times, and they've been attacked by their dog multiple times, and on and on and on with issues. Owning a dog is supposed to be one of the most amazing, rewarding things that you can do.
Yes, yep.
They're supposed to be your best friend. So take the time, understand how to train, find somebody to help you train. Don't be afraid to use a tool if it helps so that you can have an enjoyable life with your dog.
Yeah. I think that was a really good wrap up to all of the biggest takeaways that we hope people would walk away from this episode gaining that. And I think also just that there is a place for those tools to help dogs be able to be rehomed if they're in shelters and avoid behavioral euthanasia that happens all the time. And so I think everything that you've said and just knowing that like they can save lives for lots of reasons, but I think those are two big reasons why dogs end up dying long before they need to, because they're not able to find a home and people who can care for them because of their behavioral issues. And so it is important to make sure you're really educated and working with a professional on how to use those tools safely and effectively and the correct way. I think that's also a really important thing for people to know. Like, make sure you're getting education so that you're using them properly and appropriately in all cases.
Absolutely. I agree.
Well, thanks for joining us for episode 3 of Elite K-9 Unleashed. We're so happy you were all here. We will include show notes in the description for this podcast, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on what you thought of podcast episode number 3. Are you for or against the use of prong collars, e-collars, and first savers? We'd love to hear it. Go ahead and email us at support@IdahoEliteK9 with your thoughts, or drop your comments down below, and we'll give you our response to your thoughts. Please join us next time for episode number 4, where we're going to break down dogs, business, and marriage and how we manage it all. We can't wait to see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.